the police think that they can enter your house and interrogate and intimidate you for safety's sake.
Yeah, it's not surprising. And, you know, a lot of focus from people that are starting to be more concerned about liberty on the Constitution. I think it would be great to get back to the Constitution. I think it could be even much simpler. Let's talk about the Declaration of Independence, which doesn't say how are we going to do government. It says what it's going to do. And it says to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men.
And these rights to which you refer, Jefferson said, are inalienable rights that come to us from our Creator. So our rights are natural to our human nature. They don't come from the government. They come from us. It's the government's job to respect and protect them.
Yes, that's the natural law. And, of course, I guess you can't teach natural law to every police officer if they haven't already learned it. But if we talked more about it and then they knew that was the purpose, we probably would have less incidents like this.
One of the great things that you did in your career, Sheriff, in addition to defending the Constitution and seeing that the men and women that worked for you understood the Constitution, is you defended the concept of federalism, which is that there are certain areas of governmental behavior excluded from federal regulation and exclusively for state regulation. And one of those areas has to do with who and how and under what circumstances guns can be registered. You stood up for the independence of a county sheriff in Arizona who was you against the Congress of the United States, and the Supreme Court sided with you in a very famous case called Prince. It should have been called Mack, but it was called Prince.
I still think it should be called the Mack Prince case. When you talk to Justice Scalia, ask him how that happened and get him to change that back, because it really should be the Mack Prince case, but that's okay. But the importance is the principle of the case. And I'll say this, what I have learned since being sheriff and filing that case and winning a case at the United States Supreme Court defended by the Clinton administration is this. Let me tell the viewers this. I'll look right at them and say this. The President of the United States cannot tell your sheriff what to do. Your sheriff is the ultimate protector of your constitutional rights. And I work now for an organization called USA 1911, USA1911.com. And we have the answer that Tom was just talking about. I believe we should make sure that every peace officer in this country is trained in the Constitution, that he becomes a constitutional guard, that we are the last line of defense. There is an answer to the big, overwhelming imbalance of power in this country.
The Prince case was about the Congress trying to force local sheriffs to spend money from their budgets in order to register certain handguns. And the Supreme Court said the Congress can't commandeer a state legislature or commandeer a county sheriff and make him work for that.
But even further than that, Judge, and what I really like, and I'm reading out of the book, The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, is that it's actually the job, the responsibility of local officials, quote, there's two governments, state and federal, each protected from incursion by the other. That's a quote right from the United States Supreme Court in the Mack Prince case. Okay, so whose job is it when the federal government goes too far, whose job is it to put up the stop sign? Local officials.
These resolutions that we see now, and I'm speaking in Columbus, Ohio on Saturday before hopefully a couple of thousand folks on the 10th Amendment. These resolutions that we see now in which state legislatures are saying, we're sovereign and we're independent. Don't they really need to do something besides just enacting these resolutions? For example, suppose the legislature of Ohio, where it's so inclined, or Arizona, when the good sheriff was a sheriff there, were to say to the federal government, we are not going to enforce federal law in this state. You need to exercise your own resources and your own manpower to do it. The feds couldn't do that.
Yeah, I think, well, every law eventually has to be challenged in court, and I saw that, and there was an article about Montana saying, we're not going to enforce the gun law, the most recent gun law, and what has to happen is that somebody has to violate the federal law, and the feds would have to prosecute it, my understanding, and then...
And they would claim the state law as a defense, and then a federal court would have to rule on it.
Then you would have to have your fight, yeah.
How serious is the problem of federalism today? I mean, the sheriff triumphed in a way. At the time that you triumphed, I was on the bench and I was teaching constitutional law. We were stunned at the outcome of Prince. We all thought it was going to go the other way. We all thought the Congress would win. For a county sheriff from Arizona to challenge the Congress and the White House and to win, the court invalidated that statute, was highly unusual. Is there a trend, I realize this was 10 years ago, back toward federalism, back toward the proper role of the states with respect to the federal government?
Well, I certainly think there's a movement towards it, and there's a desire, and even from some politicians and some legislatures, I think push has to come to shove. Somewhere there has to be not a violent confrontation, but a confrontation that will be challenged definitively. And then if it goes the wrong way, I think that's a chance for a lot of public outcry, a lot of education, and hopefully a lot of coalition building.
Sheriff?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever have, were you ever confronted with situations where the men and women that worked for you arrested people just because they got irritated at the people? I mean, what do you say to the prosecutor? This charge has to be thrown out because we can't prove that a crime was committed.
Well, I threw some out before it got to the prosecutor, and we really hope that our people are trained, that peace officers are trained to follow constitutional propriety. I really think that's where the rubber hits the pavement. Are the police officers in this country going to be allowed to misuse their badge and the authority to take away freedom? Professor Gates was taken away from his home in handcuffs. His freedom was taken away from him and controlled by the police.
Because the police got irritated at him.
Exactly. It was a pride arrest. It wasn't a violation of the law arrest.
I have often complained as a judge, as a television commentator, as a professor of constitutional law, that the government seems to spend in courtrooms more time trying to justify evading or avoiding the Constitution than following it.
Exactly.
And your experience has been similar.
Exactly. And I challenge every peace officer in this country to look at your oath of office. It really boils down. Are we going to have public servants who keep their word to uphold and defend the United States Constitution? So many times when they're pressed on that, they'll actually say, it's not my job to uphold and defend the United States Constitution. Completely opposite what they promised to do.
Right. Before I let you go, what is the greatest loss of common sense today amongst the government, the federal government, the state governments, and people's attitude toward government? Is it the concept that health care is a right rather than a good? Is it the belief that the government will take care of us from cradle to grave and that that's a good thing? Is it that the loss of liberty that the sheriff sees at the street level with the officers that used to work for him? Where is the greatest loss of common sense today?
Well, I mean, I certainly talk a lot about property in my book, not land ownership, but each person's right to the fruits of their work. But I think that's inseparable from liberty. I think it derives from liberty. And what we now call the non-aggression principle, which we think that the libertarians, the objectivists invented, was actually, that is liberty. That's the definition of liberty. Jefferson said it, Adams said it, and if you apply that, all of our problems go away. There's no need for compromise and there's no conflict between individual rights and the needs of society. That is the need of society.
Guys, stay with us. We're now being joined by my good friend, Professor Walter Block, who teaches at Loyola, teaches economics at Loyola University in New Orleans, and is a senior economic fellow at the von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. Professor Block, welcome to Freedom Watch.
You're very kind to have me. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. One of the topics of the 400 or 500 emails I get every day is from people so incredibly frustrated by the Bush administration's assault on our Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment liberties, frustrated by the Obama administration's assault on our commercial liberties, on our right to have contracts enforced, on our right to have the word free remain in free enterprise. And the question I always get is, I can't wait until November 2010. What can I do now to make sure people know that my basic natural rights are being violated by the government wholesale, by people who haven't even read the legislation they're voting for?
Well, that's a good question. I would say what they could do in the ballot box is vote for good politicians. Ron Paul will be up for election. Schiff is, I think, running in Connecticut, and Ron Paul's son, I think will be running in Kentucky. And unhappily, the ballot box doesn't give you much option unless you live in those three places, Texas, Kentucky, or Connecticut, you can't do too much in the ballot box because I don't think that any of the other major